of Nebo here today, the CEO of Digital Serbia Initiative, our startup Genome global member in Serbia. So today we're very looking forward to hearing from you and your experience in accelerating the Serbia startup ecosystem. So first off, could you tell us a bit more about Digital Serbia Initiative and a bit about how we got started in our joint work together to accelerate the Serbian startup ecosystem?
Sure. Thank you, Adam. Digital Serbia Initiative is a private, non-profit, non-governmental organization founded by the leading digital players in Serbia from various categories of actors, with the objective to ensure that Serbia, through this digital revolution, develops very strong digital economy with high added value rather than be marginalized in low value added production economy. We have programs in 4 areas: education, legal and regulatory framework improvements, digital infrastructure, and also development of the startup ecosystem, which is one of the focus areas. In our work, we looking at the startup ecosystem development. Luckily, our government as well as priority has digital. So the cabinet of the Prime Minister has been driving digital agenda in a very focused way, as well as the Ministry of Innovation and Technological Development. So looking at the startup ecosystem development, we wanted first to get the proper assessment of our ecosystem using the methodology that's used globally, because that's where we compete. And also the methodology that is evidence-based and data-driven, but also that includes the insights from the ecosystem. At Digital Serbia Initiative, we are committed to that disciplined, data-driven and evidence-based approach. And the same values were shared with the Ministry of Innovation and Technological Development. So at looking at the options, we selected Startup Genome exactly for those reasons, because you are data-driven, but also you actually come into the local environment to provide the insights based on the wealth of experience that you have. So that's how we got together.
Fantastic, thank you. And could you tell us a bit about our joint ecosystem assessment and strategy work, how this has had an impact on the ecosystem?
One of the key issues that we actually had in the ecosystem, that understanding of the ecosystem in a way was a bit anecdotal in terms of the key ecosystem participants. So as I mentioned, our strategy was to get the assessment done in such a way that it is based on solid methodology, but also that will drive an alignment in understanding in the ecosystem about the key elements in terms of the key strengths and the weaknesses that we have in the ecosystem. So the assessment that actually included the survey that you have, combined with the visits that some of the key people from Startup Genome team did in our ecosystem, Belgrade and Novi Sad, meeting with the representatives in terms of the policymakers of the government side, universities, startup support organizations, actual startups, as well as strong IT service sector, because outsourcing model is quite strong in Serbia as well, basically allowed us to get very solid understanding of the ecosystem by all participants in the ecosystem.
Fantastic to hear. In terms of the importance of data, could you tell us a couple of specific examples how data has helped you drive conversations needed on, say, particular policies or particular programs to really focus in and accelerate the ecosystem?
I could actually pick a couple from what Stephan just presented. So as he outlined, in any ecosystem, and especially in the smaller ones like ours, the resources are always limited. And it is key to understand, if you look at various success factors, where should you apply your resources? And the assessment actually provided us with a clear understanding at what phase of development in the life cycle of the ecosystem our ecosystem is, and then zooming into what are actually the success factors that we should focus on based on that. And here is actually one example that was also featured there. We actually thought, and probably most of the ecosystems do, that we are really well connected, at least locally in our ecosystem. What the assessment has shown, and actually broken down in those segments that Stephan just explained, that we are connected quite well globally, above the global average in our ecosystem, especially with the leading one like the Silicon Valley, but actually on the local connectedness level that we are lacking, that there is low level of local connectedness, which has negative impact because the average revenue per startup in the ecosystem is actually half of what it could be if we had a proper local connectedness. And that actually enabled us to focus on that, because being the ecosystem in the activation phase, local connectedness is one of the key success factors. So it's actually more important than global connectedness. So that allowed us to actually drive the policies and programs in terms of the strategy in the private sector, but as well in terms of the government policies to try to help to improve on that success factor.
That's great to hear, Nebo, because I hear so much about, from a government perspective, the first discussion is always about funding. Because entrepreneurs, when you ask them, they are never funded enough. That holds true in Silicon Valley. It certainly holds true where I'm sitting, and it holds true in many other places in the world. But to have something like an underlying cultural factor, I think we've seen that.
Exactly.
Your entrepreneurs, they are great and they are driven. But sometimes we had the impression, and our data showed that they were sitting next to each other, not trying to share concepts, but rather guarding the idea with their life, so to speak, because it's theirs. They're fearful of somebody else running away with it. That's a cultural factor. DSI is doing such a wonderful job now in order to break down these rather cultural barriers that have nothing to do with a big seed funding fund or big checks and other factors. It's purely cultural, and you're doing such a wonderful job in
yeah. And exactly, which was surprising. The culture, actually, there is a lot of socializing and interaction in Serbia. So we were expecting that we would do well in that respect. So, yeah.
I was similarly surprised because you're such a friendly country where you get to know people very, very quickly, and they're incredibly helpful. But as entrepreneurs, everybody, first of all, for their own fortune. And that, I think, I'm seeing really the change in culture. That's fantastic. Nebo, on that note, when you look at data, have there been other data points, data-driven conversations where you found a conversation with government to be more easy in a sense? So personally, for me, I find the genome and other data points that are available always incredibly helpful to have a more objective discussion with the Prime Minister, Head of State, Minister of Economy, Minister of Innovation and Digital Transformation, because there's so much, I don't know, hearsay, so much gut feeling in stories that are being told. And I find it really interesting to have these really objectified discussions where you can say, well, it's hard data, it's not belief, it's not just a flamboyant speech on the stage, but it's actually hard data, it's fact, it's methodology. Not sure how that was for you, but you've been interacting so much with the Prime Minister at the various ministries.
It actually helped quite well. As I mentioned, we are working closely with the cabinet of the Prime Minister and also with the cabinet and the Minister of Innovation and Technological Development on this. So the member in Startup Genome is Ministry of Innovation and Technological Development. So we've been working together with you on this. And the data that it got really helped a lot in order to ground the discussions and have objective measure of actually what's relevant and how important it is to give it the kind of weight coefficient if you want. And in startup ecosystem development, it is really necessary, if you look at it from the private sector perspective, it is really necessary to mobilize the might in terms of the budget and policy making capability of the government, because the private sector alone really cannot make the impact that's necessary to drive the ecosystem. And having that kind of cooperation and work together with the public sector, with the government from the get-go was very important. So they would know what's the methodology that we are using and what's going to drive the decision. And during some of those preliminary findings, when we had preliminary results and those insight visits that JF made, and you came to the ecosystem as well, what we've done, we always organized actually discussions and presentations within the private sector, but also with the colleagues from the government. So where Ministry of Finance, the cabinets I mentioned, were actually presented with the data and the findings that we had. So it was bringing the whole ecosystem together along the way. And I would actually pick one example there. So looking at our ecosystem, which is in activation phase, where we have 300 to 400 startups, we actually set the objective to, within 5 years, get to globalization stage in order to be kind of self-sustainable, where we need to have 700 to 1,000 startups. So that's the objective. But what was key there from the data to see that actually it's not only the funding that we need to put in place. The data showed that we need to work basically on 3 fronts and improve in 3 areas with an integrated strategy. One is actually to increase the number of startups in terms of the output of ecosystem, to increase the early stage funding and properly stage it with respect to the funding policy in terms of what's there in terms of grants and kind of pre-seed programs that would drive the number of startups, but how to actually increase and ramp up with kind of Series A and seed to create the funnel. And the third one, actually, to increase the quality of the startup so that we can get an attractive deal flow, and actually also develop the VC part of the funding capability in Serbia.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nebo. In terms of